Hey, how's it going? My name is Nick, and I am the creator of Movie Nuts. And this is a channel dedicated to incorporating the best recaps of modern films, historical films, classic films, your favorite films, the films you hate, everything you love or don't like about films, and putting them all together and showing the world how this works into our culture and how history of film and how the history of our world dictates what films are and how films dictate what our reality is in a lot of cases. So in a lot of ways, philosophy dictates how films are made, and even films dictate philosophy, and that sort of back and forth. And what I thought I wanted to do for this first film, it's going to be a long one, and this is all about just kicking off Movie Nuts, the channel, and showing the world different, just sort of like a jumping off point for what this channel is all about. And this channel is going to go into a lot of different directions. We're going to have recaps of your favorite films, like I said, the films you hate, and also save you a lot of time in terms of not wasting money and time seeing movies that you might not like, but maybe seeing this channel first before you go to the movie theater or rent it or buy it on DVD or buy it on streaming and whatnot, and then get a sense for if you want to see that film or not. And what I wanted to do today is kind of introduce you to a couple of books and a couple of passages from these books. Right now, I'm currently reading this book by William Strauss and Neil Howe called The Fourth Turning. And the gist of this book is, there are cycles in history throughout civilization, through modern civilization and even ancient civilization, that keep repeating. And so history is repeating, and it has a lot to do with societies, has a lot to do with the economy, has a lot to do with the sentiment around the ups and downs of the way society moves. And so this is a really interesting book. I just started. I'm going to pull out a couple of passages from here because a lot of the times films and history, they go together, like I said before. And so I think this is really interesting to bring together in this channel and in Movie Nuts because, and by the way, today is February 6th. So I'm recording this on February 6th, 2023. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to read a couple of nice passages in here, sort of the first few pages to really kick off the idea of how history and society and culture have this revolving door, ups and downs and revolutions. And also I'm going to bring to the table this book called Philosophy Through Fiction and Film, which is a book I've had for over 20 years. And this book brings together some of the more popular movies and what the philosophy is within them and how to extract sort of the philosophy of what the filmmakers were doing and what the screenwriters were doing at that time. Really interesting. I've been reading some passages here and there lately, and I want to bring to the table and share with you guys some of those passages that I found really interesting. So what I thought I'd do first is let me just start off here and go into The Fourth Turning. This is by Neil Strauss and William Strauss and Neil Howe. And so what I'm going to do is just go over here and kind of go into the first passages. Like the introduction of this book really lays out this idea of the fourth turning. And I really find that this book, first of all, was written in 1997. And the interesting thing about this is how prophetic it is when you think about that this book was written in 1997 and it talks about in the next 20 years. So, this time, roughly, right now, that we're living in, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 2027. And it talks, so this book was written in 1997 and he makes some points in here that during the next, 10 years, which would have been like 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, those areas, it's interesting. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right on chapter 1, right here. And I'll start right there. And what I'm going to do is read this opening quote. I think it's really interesting. It says, "That which hath been is now, and that which is hath to be hath already been, and God requireth that which is past." Ecclesiastes, I think it's in the Bible, 3:15. So sorry for my pronunciation there. Okay, so chapter 1, Winter Comes Again. America feels like it's unraveling. Though we live in an era of relative peace and comfort, we have settled into a mood of pessimism about the long-term future, fearful that our superpower nation is somehow rotting from within. Neither an epic victory over communism nor an extended upswing of the business cycle can buoy our public spirit. The Cold War and the New Deal struggles are plainly over, but we are of no mind to bask in their successes. The America of today feels worse in its fundamentals than the one many of us remember from our youth, a society presided over by those of supposedly lesser consciousness. Wherever we look, from LA to DC, from Oklahoma City to Sun City, we see paths to a foreboding future. We yearn for civic character, but satisfy ourselves with symbolic gestures and celebrity circuses. We perceive no greatness in our leaders, a new meanness in ourselves. Small wonder that each new election brings a new jolt, its aftermath, a new disappointment. Not long ago, America was more than the sum of its parts. Now it is less. Around World War II, we were proud as a people, but modest as individuals. Fewer than 2 people in TED said yes when asked, "Are you a very important person?" Today, this is 1997 today, more than 6 in 10 say yes. Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. I wonder how it is 27 years later. Jeez. You think we're more entitled today? Where we once thought ourselves collectively strong, we now regard ourselves as individually entitled. Now keep thinking in terms of cycles, okay? Yet even while we exalt our personal growth, we realize that millions of self-actualized persons don't add up to an actualized society. Popular trust in virtually every American institution, from businesses and governments to churches and newspapers, keeps falling to new lows. Public debts soar, the middle class shrinks, welfare dependencies deepen, and cultural arguments worsen by the year. We now have the highest incarceration rate and the lowest eligible voter participation rate of any major democracy. Statistics inform us that many adverse trends, like crime, divorce, abortion, scholastic aptitudes, may have bottomed out, but we're not reassured. Optimism still attaches to self, but no longer to family or community. Most Americans express more hope for their own prospects than for their children's or the nation's. Parents widely fear that the American dream, which was there for their parents and still there barely for them, will not be there for their kids. Young householders are reaching their mid-30s, never having known a time when America seemed to be on the right track. Middle-aged people look at their thin savings accounts and slim to none pensions, scoff at an illusionary Social Security trust fund, and try not to dwell on what a burden their old age could become. Seniors separate into their old leisure world, recoiling at the lost virtue of youth while trying not to think about the future. Sounds really familiar, this whole idea about Social Security going away. And this book is 27 years old, something like that, 27 years old. It's incredible. We perceive our civic challenges as some vast, insoluble Rubik's Cube. Behind each problem lies another problem that must be solved first, and behind that lies yet another, and another, ad infinitum. Infinitum. Did I pronounce that right? I might have. To fix crime, we have to fix the family. But before we do that, we have to fix welfare, and that means fixing our budget, and that means fixing our civic spirit. But we can't do that without fixing moral standards, and that means fixing schools and churches, and that means fixing the inner cities. And that's impossible unless we fix crime. There's no fulcrum on which to rest a policy lever. People of all ages sense that something huge will have to sweep across America before the gloom can be lifted, and that's an awareness we suppress. As a nation, we're in deep denial. While we grope for answers, we wonder if analysis may be crowding out our institution. Like the anxious patient who takes 17 kinds of medicine while poring over his own CAT scan, we find it hard to stop and ask, what is the underlying malady really about? How can we best bring the primal forces of nature to our assistance? Isn't there a choice lying somewhere between total control and total despair? Deep down beneath the tangle of trend lines, we suspect that our history or biology or very humanity must have something simple and important to say to us. But we don't know what it is. If we once did know, we have since forgotten. Wherever we're headed, America is evolving in ways most of us don't like or understand. Individually focused, yet collectively adrift. Interesting. Isn't that interesting? We wonder if we're heading toward a waterfall. Are we? So this is really interesting. So you can kind of get a sense that a lot of the stuff that was discussed 26 years ago, no, 25 years ago, I think it is, that it seems like it's cyclical already. Just the ideas we're talking about, how, we identify less collectively with each other versus individually and so forth, and how America is doom and gloom, and how we've always heard that before: Social Security, welfare, crime, education, scholarship, all that stuff seems to be on the decline. And yet here we are talking about the same things a quarter of a century later. That's amazing. So I'm going to keep going here. Again, this is for Movie Nuts, the channel, and today is February 6th, and this is the first video of many. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going here, and I'm just going to keep reading. I'm going to read to the next passage, and this is the passage right here. It's all happened before. It might be backwards in your screen. That's okay. Okay, it's all happened before. The reward of the historian is to locate patterns that recur over time and to discover the natural rhythms of social experience. In fact, at the core of modern history lies this remarkable pattern. Over the past 5 centuries, Anglo-American society has entered a new era, a new turning. That's why the book's called Turning, the fourth turning. This new turning every 2 decades or so. At the start of each turning, people change how they feel about themselves, the culture, the nation, and the future. Turnings come in cycles of 4. Each cycle spans the length of a long human life, roughly 80 to 100 years, a unit of time the ancients called saeculum. Together, the 4 turnings of the saeculum comprise history's seasonal rhythm of growth, maturation, entropy, and destruction. The first turning is a high and upbeat era of strengthening institutions and weakening individualism. When a new civic order implants and the old values regime decays. The second turning is an awakening, a passionate era of spiritual upheaval, when the civic order comes under attack from a new values regime. The third turning is an unraveling, a downcast era of strengthening individualism and weakening institutions when the old civic order decays and the new values regime implants. The fourth turning is a crisis, a decisive era of secular upheaval when the values regime propels the replacement of the old civic order with a new one. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always, these mood shifts catch people by surprise. So each turning is different unto itself, but they're sudden. Oftentimes we're inside of a different turning by the time we realize it individually or we realize it collectively. Each turning comes with its own identifiable mood. Always these mood shifts catch people by surprise. In the current saeculum, the first turning was the American high of the Truman, Eisenhower, and Kennedy presidency. As World War II wound down, no one predicted that America would soon become so confident and institutionally muscular, yet so conformist and spiritually complacent. But that's what happened. The second turning was the consciousness revolution, stretching from the campus revolts of the mid-60s to the tax revolts of the early 1980s. Before John Kennedy was assassinated, no one predicted that America was about to enter an era of personal liberation and cross a cultural divide that would separate anything thought or said after from anything thought or said before. But that's what happened. The third turning has been the culture wars, an era that began with Reagan's mid-1980s mourning in America and is due to expire around the middle of the 00 decade, so the middle of the 2005 decade. And this guy is saying 8 or 10 years from now, okay? Amid the glitz of the early Reagan years, no one predicted that the nation was entering an era of national drift and institutional decay, but that's where we are. Have major national mood shifts like this ever happened before? Yes, many times. Have Americans ever experienced anything like this current attitude of unraveling? Yes, many times over the centuries. And this is where movies comes in. And again, this is for the channel. If you're just jumping in now, this is for the channel Movie Nuts. And today is February 6th, 2023. And we're going to keep going here because movies play into history and history plays into movies. It's cyclical. Okay, so people in their 80s can remember an earlier mood that was much like today's. They can recall the years between Armistice Day, which was 1918, and the Great Crash of 1929. Euphoria over a global military triumph was painfully short-lived. Earlier optimism about a progressive future gave way to a jazz-age nihilism and a pervasive cynicism about high ideal. Bosses swaggered in immigration ghettos, the KKK in the South, the Mafia in the industrial heartland, and defenders of Americanism in myriad middle towns. Unions atrophied, government weakened, third parties were the rage, and a dynamic marketplace ushered in new consumer technologies, which were automobiles, radios, phones, jukeboxes, vending machines, that made life feel newly complicated and frenetic. The risky pleasures of a lost generation shocked middle-aged decency crusaders, many of them tired radicals who were then moralizing against the detritus of the Mauve decade, quote, Mauve decade, of their youth, which is around the 1890s. Opinions polarized around no-compromise cultural issues like drugs, family, and decency. Meanwhile, parents strove to protect a scout-like new generation of children who aged in today's senior citizens. Back then, the details were different, but the underlying mood resembled what Americans feel today. Listening to Walter Lippmann writing during World War I, this is his writing here, we are unsettled to the very roots of our being. There isn't a human relation, whether a parent or child, husband and wife, worker and employer, that doesn't move in a strange situation. We're not used to a complicated civilization. We don't know how to behave when personal contact and eternal authority have disappeared. There are no precedents to guide us, no wisdom that was not meant for a simpler age. Move backward again to an era called by the oldest Americans still alive when today's seniors were little children. In the late 1840s and early 1850s, America drifted into a foul new mood. The hugely popular Mexican War had just ended in a stirring triumph, but the huzzas over territorial gain didn't last long. Cities grew mean and politics hateful. Immigration surged, financial speculation boomed, and railroads and cotton exports released powerful new market forces that destabilized communities. Having run out of answers, the two major parties, the Whigs and the Democrats, were slowly disintegrating. A righteous debate over slavery's westward expansion erupted between so-called Southerns and abolitionists. Many of them middle-aged spiritualists who were in more euphoric 1830s and 1840s, spiritualists who in the more euphoric 1830s and 1840s had dabbled in transcendentalism, utopian communes, and other assorted youth-fired crusades. Colleges went begging for students as a brazen young generation hustled west to pan for gold in towns fabled for their violence. Meanwhile, a child generation grew up with a new regimentation that startled European visitors who, a decade earlier, had bemoaned the wildness of American kids. Sound familiar? Run the clock back the length of yet another long life to the 1760s. The recent favorable conclusion to the French and Indian War had brought 80 years of conflict to a close. Holy cow, 80 years of conflict. The French and Indian War was 80 years? Wow. That's like an entire lifetime. That's wild. And we'll talk about this. There are some films, like Last of the Mohicans, that we're going to talk about this in the channel Movie Nuts. And, we're going to talk about that. And, that film goes back when I was a lot younger, maybe that might have been around 1992, 93, I think. And so that's, over 30 years old at this point. And today's, 2023, February 6th. And so we'll talk about that film as well. And I believe that was about the French and Indian War. Yet when England tried to recoup the expenses of the war through taxation, the colonies seethed with a directionless discontent. Immigration from the Old World, emigration across the Appalachians, and the colonial trade arguments all rose sharply. As debtors' prisons bulged, middle-aged people complained of what Benjamin Franklin called the white savagery of youth. Middle-aged orators, peers of the fiery young preachers of the circa 1740 Great Awakening, summoned civic consciousness and organized popular crusades of economic austerity. The youth elite became the first to attend disciplined church schools in the colonies rather than academies in corrupt Albion. Gradually, colonists began separating into mutually loathing camps, one defending and the other attacking the crown. Sound familiar again? So this idea of, aligning with authority versus being independent of authority and criticizing it. We say that a lot, even today. During each of these periods, Americans celebrated an ethos of frenetic and laissez-faire individualism, a word first popularized in the 1840s, yet also fretted over social fragmentation, epidemic violence, and economic and technological change that seemed to be accelerating beyond society's ability to absorb it. During each of these periods, Americans had recently achieved a stunning victory over a long-standing foreign threat, Imperial Germany, Imperial New Spain, which is Mexico, or Imperial New France. Yet that victory came to be associated with a worn-out definition of collective purpose and, perversively, unleashed a torrent of pessimism. During each of these periods, an aggressive moralism darkened the debate about the country's future. Culture wars raged, the language of political discourse coarsened, nativist and sectional, feelings hardened, immigration and substance abuse came under attack, and attitudes towards children grew more protective. During each of these periods, Americans felt well-rooted in their personal values, but newly hostile toward the corruption of civic life. Sorry for my creaking chair, by the way. Unifying institutions, which had seemed secure for decades, now felt ephemeral. Those who had once trusted the nation with their lives were growing old and dying. To the new crop of young adults, the nation hardly mattered. The whole res publica seemed to be on the verge of disintegrating. During each of these previous third turnings, Americans felt as if they were drifting towards a cataclysm, and as it turned out, they were. By 1760s, were followed by the American Revolution. By the 1850s, by the Civil War, the 1920s by the Great Depression, and World War II. And these unraveling eras were followed by a bone-jarring crisis so monumental that, by the end, American society emerged in a wholly new form. And again, we're going to be talking all about this stuff. I'm just going to take off my jacket. It's so hot. We're going to be talking a lot about this stuff in this channel, Movie Nuts. And we may have some talks, but mostly I think it's going to be a lot about movies and recaps and top 10 lists, like the top movies of history, maybe thematic ideas. And so a lot of this is going to be interwoven and connected. It's going to be, one big journey as we go on it. Okay, so where are we? Okay. Each time the change came with a scant warning. As late as December 1773, November 1859, and October 1929, the American people had no idea how close it was. Then sudden sparks like the Boston Tea Party, John Brown's raid and execution, Black Tuesday, transformed the public mood swiftly and permanently. Over the next 2 decades or so, society convulsed. Emergencies required massive sacrifices from a citizenry that responded by putting community ahead of itself. Leaders led and people trusted them. As a new social construct was created, people overcame challenges once thought insurmountable and used the crisis to elevate themselves and their nation to a higher plane of civilization. In the 1790s, they triumphantly created the modern world's first democratic republic. In the late 1860s, wounded but reunited, they forged a genuine nation extending new guarantees of liberty and equality. In the late 1940s, they constructed the most Promethean superpower ever seen. The fourth turning is history's greatest discontinuity. It ends one epoch and begins another. I'm going to keep going here. History is seasonal and winter is coming. Like nature's winter, the secular winter can come early or late. A fourth turning can be long and difficult, brief but severe, or perhaps mild. But like winter, it cannot be avoided, people. It must come in its turn. Here, in summary, is what the rhythms of modern society warn about America's future. The next fourth turning is due to begin shortly after. This is really important. When I read this and I was like blown away of how accurate it seemed to be for me. And I hope you might find some of that as well. So Yeah, so this is about the fourth turning. And remember, like I said, this was written in 1997. This is over 2017, over 20, 18, 19, 20. This is over 24 years ago, something like that. So it's a long time. Where were you 24 years ago? And so if you think about the authors here, it's probably written before that. This is the early pages of the book. So this is probably written well before that. Maybe, 27 years ago, something like that. So think about that. Okay, this is how he's describing the fourth turning, which is right around now. The next fourth turning is due to begin shortly after the new millennium, midway through the 00 decade, so 2005. Around the year 2005, a sudden spark will catalyze a crisis mood. So what happened in 2005, 6, 7, and 8? Remember the mortgage crisis? It only became apparent to us around 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, I would say, around 2012, that whole period, 9, 10, 11, 12, was that 4 years? But if you think about it, it really began probably 2004, 5, 6, 7, somewhere around there. So this is pretty accurate if you give some optimism to what he's talking about here. Again, this is Movie Nuts, and today's February 6, 2023. Okay, so around the year 2005, a sudden spark will catalyze a crisis mood. Remnants of the old social order will disintegrate. Political and economic trust will implode. Real hardship will reset the land, or beset the land, with severe distress that can involve questions of class, race, nation, and empire. Yet this time of trouble will bring seeds of social rebirth. Americans will share a regret about recent mistakes and a resolute new consensus about what to do. Where am I? The very survival of the nation will feel at stake, sometimes before the year 2025. Think about that, before the year 2025. That's now. This is 2023. This is February 6, 2023. America will pass through a great gate in history, commensurate with the American Revolution, Civil War, and twin emergencies of the Great Depression and World War II. The risk of catastrophe will be very high. The nation could erupt into insurrection or civil violence, crack up geographically, or succumb to another authoritarian rule. If there is a war, it is likely to be one of maximum risk and effort. In other words, a total war. Every fourth turning has registered an upward ratchet in the technology of destruction, and it's mankind's willingness to use it. In the Civil War, the two capital cities, which surely have incinerated each other, had the mean. The two capitals in the Civil War, the two capital cities, which surely have incinerated each other, had the means been at hand. Had they had the means, they surely would have had total destruction. In World War II, America invented a new technology of annihilation, which the nation swiftly put to use. This time, America will enter a fourth turning with the means to inflict unimaginable horrors, and perhaps will confront adversaries who possess the same. Yet Americans will also enter the fourth turning with a unique opportunity to achieve a new greatness as a people. Many despair that values that were new in the 1960s are today so entwined with social dysfunction and cultural decay that they can no longer lead anywhere positive. Through the current unraveling era, it is probably true, but in the crucible of crisis, that will change. As the old civic order gives way, Americans will have to craft a new one. This will require a values consensus and, to administer it, the empowerment of a strong new political regime. It's kind of weird, right? Like, what are they predicting here? If all goes well, there could be a renaissance of civic unrest and more. Today's third turning problems, the Rubik's Cube of crime, money, family, culture, and ethics, will snap into a fourth turning solution. America's post-crisis answers will be, I'm going to keep reading down here. I'm just thinking of something here. Today's third turning problems of race, money, family, culture, and ethics will snap into a fourth turning solution. Okay, so are we in a third turning or the fourth turning right now? I'll have to go back. That's what I'm questioning right now. Right? The next fourth turning. So I think we're in the fourth right now. So we're about to come to a solution. Okay. America's post-crisis answers will be as organically interconnected as today's pre-crisis questions seem hopelessly tangled. By the 2020s, America could become a society that is good by today's standards and also one that works. So good and also it works in the 2020s. That's where we are right now. Thus might be the next fourth turning end in apocalypse or glory. So it could end in apocalypse or glory. Really interesting. The nation could be ruined, its democracy destroyed, and millions of people scattered or killed. Or America could enter a new golden age, triumphantly applying shared values to improve the human condition. The rhythms of history do not reveal the outcome of the coming crisis. All they suggest is the timing and dimension. We cannot stop the seasons of history, but we can prepare for them. Right now, in 1997, we have 8, 10, perhaps a dozen more years to get ready. Then events will begin to take choices out of our hands. Yes, winter is coming, but our path through that winter is up to us. History's howling storms can bring out the worst and best in a society. The next fourth turning could literally destroy us as a nation and people, leaving us cursed in the histories of those who endure and remember. Alternatively, it could ennoble our lives, elevate us as a community, and inspire acts of consummate heroism, deeds that will grow into myth-like legends recited by our heirs far into the future. Interesting. So we may leave an impression. There is a mysterious cycle in human events. President Franklin Roosevelt observed in the depths of the Great Depression, to some generation much is given, of other generations much is expected. This generation has a rendezvous with destiny. The cycle remains mysterious, but need not come as a total surprise. Though the scenario and outcome are uncertain, the schedule is set. The next fourth turning, America's next rendezvous with destiny, will begin in roughly 10 years and end in roughly 30. So 1997 and 10 years is 2007. 2007, so another 30 years. So it's going to end in like something 40, like 2040. That's the whole period of the fourth turning. So we're in the middle of that right now, 2024, or just the early half of that. So the fourth turning is a long period. We'll begin, so this is 1997, we'll begin roughly 10 years and end in roughly 30 years. How can we offer this prophecy with such confidence? Because it's all happened before many times. So it's really interesting when you think about how prophetic, not pathetic, prophetic like prophecy, this is. And this is just the first few pages. And again, this is The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And today is February 6th, 2023. And this is the first video for the YouTube channel Movie Nuts. And this is really wild how we think that we have individual powers and individual decision-making powers about our lives and the direction. But if you think about it, there's only so many choices that we have in our lives, not because we're limited, but because it's our nature, I think. There's only so many responses we have to a certain event in our lives. There's only a certain number of choices. So it's our nature to repeat things. And I think that's kind of what happens here. As a society, as a collective intelligence, we go into these ebbs and flows, these cycles, these turnings, as Howe and Strauss call them. And we've seen them all before as a society, not individually. Individually, I've only been here, more than a few decades in my age, and so forth. People watching this, where you are. And so it's interesting that if we look back, even in the time that we've been here, we've probably only seen a handful of new, interesting events in our lives. If you put that into perspective, a lot of things tend to repeat. A lot of the same things we hear in the news repeat. Not the biggest events, not like the biggest wars and all that stuff, but they will eventually. Or the biggest catastrophes or the biggest triumphs in our lives. Those things will repeat. Which brings me over to the next thing that I want to talk about in here. So philosophy through fiction and film. And part of Movie Nuts that I want to talk about, at least in this channel, is the idea of how films dictate our understanding of the world and our understanding of the people that created the film. and how that plays into how we see our lives. And a lot of it is philosophical, a lot of it is interpretation from the filmmaker's perspective, their philosophy, their ideas, their values. And we pull from it our own interpretation, but it's very similar to how other people see it as well. And the first movie that I want to talk about is a favorite of mine, one of my favorites, and it's called The Matrix. And it's directed by, at the time, Larry and Andy Wachowski. And this film came out and was being designed and created around the time this book came out. And The Matrix is all about, in a nutshell, are we living in a simulation? You know, the movie is this idea that explores whether our lives are just a simulation. And there are people today that believe that we are, and I am starting to believe that the definition of a simulation, at least for me, has changed. Meaning, what is a simulation? If you think about it, we think of simulation, we think of computers, we think of artificial intelligence, but it could not be. It may not be, is what I'm saying. It could be a simulation is just sort of a representation of the world as we see it. You know, it's our perspective. And there's this guy named, if we want to get down to like the nuts and bolts of the computer side of it, there's a guy named David Icke, really popular on YouTube. He's been around for decades, talking about this idea of how we are living in a simulation, similar to the sort of the log line and the synopsis of The Matrix, in that there is an intelligent design behind our daily lives. And I think about 10 years ago, there were scientists that I believe they sent out lasers into space, and they watched the dissipation of the lasers, like the power of the laser as it dissipates, as it goes further out into space. And they realized that dissipation as it goes further out into space was almost perfectly in line with a computer simulation, meaning how energy dissipates in a computer. The dissipation of these lasers was dissipating at a rate exactly like a computer simulation. And so David Icke was brought to the forefront with the discussions around this time, if I remember correctly. And if we do another video on this, I'll put up some resources and some references to this. But David Icke, for years, have been chastised as his hokey theory was attached to him. And David Icke was sort of given a free pass finally, because his ideas, according to science, were not that far off. It's just maybe the interpretation of what he believed was a little bit different than what these scientists had discovered. But still really interesting. The way I see a simulation is like, how do we perceive the world? And whether it's computer based or whether the simulation is something else, it's incredible. Further, I want to add that, I heard recently, I was at a Tony Robbins event, and Tony was talking about how resolution for screens and cameras and what we're watching right now is getting so good that between I think it's 10K resolution and like 15K resolution, so how many pixels, 15,000 pixels, there's going to become a point where if we see real life and a screen that's like very high pixel count, we won't be able to tell the difference. So that's pretty wild to think about, that we won't be able to tell the difference. And how do we know that we're not there now, right? So are our eyes looking at a high resolution screen right now? And if technology becomes so good, will we realize that it's technology in the first place? Another person you want to look up at some point is this guy named Ray Kurzweil, and he has some of the most patents in human history. His name is Ray Kurzweil. I think he's from Massachusetts. I went to go see him talk about 15 years ago with my father at the time. He was really into him. He's now head of something at Google, Ray Kurzweil. He started Kurzweil keyboards. He did a lot of patents for the blind so they could read. And this guy believes that that someday man and machine will come together as one, and it's called the singularity, where we have machine and man are going along like this, like this, like this. It becomes algorithmic, like exponential, in terms of the synergies between what man can do with machine and how it's kind of combining right now. And if we think about it, we're nearly there. with our phones. I have to have my phone with me at all times, and I've noticed that you may identify with this as well, that our sense of direction seems to be going down. Like my sense of direction when I was a kid, before I had a cell phone, and I was a late adopter to a cell phone. To be honest, I don't think I got a cell phone until I was like 26 or something like that. It's crazy. Everybody else already had a cell phone for years, like 10 years by that point. And I don't know why it's never gotten around to getting one. I was late into the game. Computers, I've always had computers, but I don't know, something with a phone. I don't know what it was. Anyway, so if you think about it, at least from my experience, my sense of direction has gone, down because I'm so reliant on my phone. The phone's ability to have a GPS and tell us where to go, what time to leave, the traffic patterns, all that. It's incredible, the technology that it has and how much we become reliant on it, how when we don't use it, we start to lose it. I also noticed that about Googling things as well. Like when I think back and I think critically about a topic or an idea, I sometimes don't believe myself. And I sometimes have to say, I don't know, let me go Google this, instead of just saying, okay, what was I thinking about at the time? What was my experience? So it's really interesting. Anyway, so getting back to this, are we living in a simulation? So again, this is Movie Nuts, and this is a channel all about bringing together philosophy of your favorite movies, whether you like them or hate them. We're going to bring recaps. We're going to have top 10 films, all that good stuff for you guys to enjoy, and to really move and make you guys enriched both educationally and culturally, all that good stuff together, because the power of films to bring us to the highs and lows of our emotion are what makes a difference in our lives and makes us move mountains, become movers and shakers, and we can have those emotional push and pulls. It's when we're in the daily grind of no emotional push and pulls is where we get in trouble. And so we can find purpose and meaning in our lives if we find those things that move us to the next level. Okay, so this is The Matrix. I'm going to read this here in this book. Again, I think I mentioned the date. I have to mention the date. This is February 6th, 2023, and this movie is called The Matrix, and it came out in 1999, I believe. It's not here, but I believe it was 99. And this is in the book Philosophy Through Fiction and Film. Okay. And this is by the directors and screenwriters Larry and Andy Wachowski. The directors Larry and Andy Wachowski are comparative newcomers to film. They wrote Assassins or Day of Reckoning, then directed Bound. However, The Matrix was their first major success as filmmakers, and the two current sequels also achieved recognition: The Matrix Reloaded and Matrix 3. Both pretty good movies, by the way. In The Matrix, a futuristic thriller, our notion of reality is challenged by a world of virtual reality that human beings accept as genuine. People have been deceived by a series of simulated figures and events generated by a computer. Since film itself is an illusion, that's interesting. Film is an illusion. Film is reality, is a portrayed reality, right? Since film itself is an illusion with other arts and cyberspace experiences, the viewer can appreciate the subtle boundary between fantasy and reality. We take the events on the screen as actual, suspending our disbelief, and when the lights come on, the real world may be hard to accept. The story has been criticized as somewhat simplistic and derivative, trailing on themes of human beings versus robots, good versus evil, and particularly the salvation of man through Christ, who is Neo in the film. However, The Matrix does present fascinating questions about the nature of reality and whether we are being deluded in our understanding of it. The film may be an uneasy amalgam of science fiction, mysticism, video games, comic books, and vague Zen notions, but it is held together by the suspense and philosophic questions. The kung fu action and the visual technology alone keep the film entertaining. And in the end, the viewer is led to reflection of a metaphysical kind. Really interesting. When I saw this film, I embarrassingly didn't quite fully wrap my head around understanding it. And for me personally, it takes me a few times to get used to it. But when I started to kind of understand the film and really dive into it, and this is around 2004, 2005 when I started, I bought the DVDs. I was like really into the idea of, I was like, man, this is, what if we are living in a simulation? The Matrix really encapsulates that really well, and however long it is, in an hour and a half, and it does so in a really interesting way. It makes you really wonder if we are being confused, deceived, or presented with an alternate reality. It makes you curious. It makes you wonder, like, what is reality in the first place? Is it subjective? Okay, so the synopsis. The central premise of the sci-fi thrill The Matrix is that, in the post-apocalyptic world, the reality experienced by human beings exists only in their minds. All events and feelings are actually images hardwired into their brains. People live entirely in this dreamlike virtual state while imagining they are living in the late 20th century. They go about their business in the usual way, oblivious to the fact that their brains have been hooked up by computer to a simulated reality. They would find it absurd to think that they are floating into comas, suspended in incubators, and that all their experiences are a complex network of delusions. Nevertheless, that is their condition. The plot of the Matrix consists of exposing the deception and in overthrowing the forces that have enslaved people through the mass hallucination. The film trades on a philosophic problem called the egocentric predicament, which was first identified and named by Ralph Barton Perry in Present Philosophical Tendencies. According to the egocentric predicament, the mind is confined to the circle of its own ideas so that it is difficult and perhaps impossible to know the external world. That is, we cannot get outside our own minds to know whether our ideas correspond to anything external. So is our life experience a representation of what's in our own mind? And I'm leaning towards yes. I don't think we're influenced by external forces. I believe our influence from external forces allow us to see our choices, whether they're limited, whether we feel limited by those choices, or we see a plethora of many choices. I think we start from the internal, work our way out. At least that's the way I see it. No standpoint exists from which we can view the external world and see whether the notions in our mind correspond to it. We are trapped within the boundaries of our being and cannot get outside ourselves to verify the reality of anyone or anything else. Given this condition, we could be skeptical about whether there exists an external world independent of our own thoughts and images. Perry describes it in this way, quote, "No one can report on the nature of things without being on hand himself. It follows that whatever thing he reports does it as a matter of fact stand in relation to him as an idea, object of knowledge or experience." Interesting. As we've seen, George Berkeley used this viewpoint to declare esse est percipi, I guess Latin, which means to be is to be perceived. He claimed that reality is nothing other than our mental ideas and that no material world exists. Berkeley's theory, however, has been extensively criticized by a number of philosophers. They have pointed out that although things must be mentally experienced in order to be known, that does not prove that reality is nothing but the ideas in our mind. Things can exist without our thinking about them. We simply would not know of their existence. In other words, all knowledge depends on our conscious ideas, but that does not prove the ideas themselves are the reality and that nothing else exists. You know, this is interesting. I'm just reading this and I'm thinking back to quantum physics, that idea of the slot experiment. So there was, I think it was like in the 20s or 30s, they were doing these experiments on whether the observer affects molecules, not molecules like, I don't even know, I'm messing this up, but look up the slot experiment. And the scientists sent like light energy, beams of light through two slots, like this, two slots. And they realized when you're looking at the slots and you look, when this light goes through the slots, it creates a pattern on a wall. So if you're putting through, it creates a pattern that looks like the two slots when observed. But when the observer being someone looking at it, at the experiment itself, when they look away, for some reason, that pattern changes completely. And it's interesting. So that's like sort of a form of reality that changes depending on who's looking at it. So who is to say that it actually exists or doesn't exist? It depends on who is looking at it, whose reality it is. I know I'm not articulating this very well, but just think about that for a moment. That's sort of the idea. This is why this guy, Berkeley, got criticized so much, because he said reality is nothing more than, what do you say, it's nothing other than our mental ideas, and that no material world exists. No material world exists. What is a material world? That's how I kind of see it. No material world exists. Maybe it does not exist. Maybe maybe, that's interesting. So anyway, let's keep going here. The Matrix human beings do not take their mental experience as reality, and the viewer, along with the protagonist, gradually learn that they are deceived. Not only does the real world lie outside their consciousness, but their consciousness is of a virtual reality and not a reflection of the actual world at all. After a preliminary action sequence, the main plot of the film begins with shots of a computer programmer, Thomas Anderson, Keanu Reeves, working late at night in an apartment littered with technological equipment. Anderson works for a software company development firm, but in addition, he commits computer crimes under the name Neo, hiring himself out as a hacker. This night, as he half dozes, a mysterious message appears on the screen, seemingly from the computer itself. The Matrix has you. It states, and follow the white rabbit, like Alice. So 2 messages. The Matrix has you and follow the white rabbit. A client named Choi then appears with his girlfriend and asks Neo to take on a job for him, which Neo agrees to do. In thanking him, Choi says, "Hallelujah, you are my savior, man, my own personal Jesus Christ." With equal significance, Neo replies, "You ever get the feeling that you're not sure if you're awake or still dreaming?" I think we've had those experiences, like lucid dreaming. Choi invites Neo to a rave, which he first declines to do, then accepts when he sees a small white rabbit on the girl's jacket. At the party, he meets Trinity, who is played by Carrie-Anne Moss, a sleekly attractive, mysterious woman dressed in black vinyl who tells him he is being watched and is in danger. And, here at this channel, Movie Nuts, we're going to go over this film definitely at some point. We're going to put a recap in here. We're going to talk about the top points in this movie and all that good stuff. The Matrix is just chock full of information. And, this movie was made back in 1999, and today is February 6th, 2023. And, years and years and years ago. But the philosophy and the ideas about our perception of life and our perception of reality stay the same. I think this movie holds the test of time for that reason. And it's funny. I wonder how long it's going to take to come up with a remake or something like that. I know there was just one just recently. I only saw bits and pieces of it on an airplane. I should go back and watch that. Okay, so let's see. Here's Trinity talking about how Neo is in danger. Trinity, this is Trinity's line. "Please, just listen. I know why you're here, Neo. You're looking for him." Her body's against his, her lips very close to his ear. "Trinity, I know because I came looking for the same thing. But when he found me, he told me I wasn't really looking for him. I was looking for an answer." There is a hypnotic quality to her voice, and Neo feels the words like a drug seeping into him. "Trinity, it's the question that brought you here. You know, the question just as I did. It is a hacker's question. Neo, what is the Matrix?" Trinity, "When I asked him, he said that no one could have ever been told the answer to that question. They have to see it to believe it." She leans close, her lips almost touching his ear. Excuse me. "Trinity, the answer is out there, Neo. It's looking for you, and it will find you if you want it to." Okay. The next day at work, Neo receives a call from Morpheus, a mythical hacker he has longed to meet. Morpheus tells him, "They're coming for you." And 2 agents and police come onto the floor. He gives Neo exact instructions on how to escape, into an empty cubicle, then through a window onto a ledge and down a scaffold. However, Neo balks the leap to the scaffold and is captured by police. Agent Smith, played by Hugo Weaving, the chief villain of the film, subsequently interrogates Neo. After telling him that he knows about his criminal activities as a hacker, Smith suffers to wipe the slate clean in return for Neo's cooperation in bringing a terrorist to justice. When Neo refuses, he inserts into his navel a fiber optic wiretap in the form of an organic worm or insect. Unsure afterwards whether or not it was a nightmare, Neo agrees to meet with Morpheus. "You're the one," Morpheus tells him. "You see, you may have spent the last few years looking for me, but I've spent most of my life looking for you." In the car that is sent for him, Trinity removes the electronic bug from his stomach in a cylindrical probe, and they continue on for the meeting with Morpheus in room 1313 of a decayed hotel. So it's weird. He's starting, he's questioning his reality already, and the removal of the bug is sort of the key that unlocks the idea that, holy cow, we're not living in a dream. This is real life. This is actually happening. Lines are being blurred. Morpheus is dressed in a long black coat with his eyes invisible behind dark glasses, which is in keeping with the noir style of film, obviously. Morpheus, "Let me tell you why you're here. You have come because you know something. What you know you can't explain, but you can feel it. You feel it in your whole body. You felt it your whole life. Felt that something is wrong with the world. You don't know what, but it's there. Do you know what I'm talking about? Neo, the Matrix. The Matrix? Morpheus, do you know what it is? Neo swallows hard and nods. Morpheus, the Matrix is everywhere. It's all around us, here, even in this room. You can see it out your window or on your television. You can feel it when you go to work, or go to your church, or pay your taxes. It is the world that has been pulled over your eyes to blind you from the truth. What truth? Morpheus. Neo said, what truth? Morpheus, now, that you are a slave, Neo. Like everyone else, you are born into bondage, kept inside a prison that you cannot smell, taste, or touch. A prison for your mind. Morpheus then offers him a choice of 2 pills. The blue will take him home, the red will lead him to the truth about the Matrix. Without much hesitation, Neo swallows the red pill. Morpheus then asks, have you ever had a dream, Neo, where you were so sure was real? What if you were unable to wake from that dream, Neo? How would you know the difference between the dream world and the real world? Subsequently, Neo undergoes a traumatic and painful process to free him from his illusions. A mirror envelops him in silvery strands, melting like gel and spreading across his body. He then finds himself in an oval capsule filled with red gelatin, a coaxial cable plugged into the base of his skull. All around him are other people, also in pods, with the same tubes feeding into a metal stem. A machine drops in front of them, paralyzes his muscles, and disengages the main cable. Immediately, he is sucked into a black hole, drawn through sewer pipes and grease traps, and finally pulled into the belly of a futuristic hovercraft. Morpheus and Trinity are there together with a man named Dozer, who is rebuilding Neo's atrophied muscles, and various members of the crew, Mouse, Cypher, APOC, Switch, Tank, and so forth. His eyes hurt because, as Morpheus explains, he's never used them before, so he is given dark glasses like the others. Morpheus then reveals to Neo that the year is about 2197, not 1997. Interesting. So 97. That's weird. Same year as this book. The other book, The Fourth Turning, I'm mentioning. Using the jack at the back of his neck, he hooks him into a computer program that shows the Chicago he is familiar with and the Chicago that has come to be. He begins to explain that in the early 21st century, human beings invented machines that were incredibly smart, but their intelligence enabled them to revolt and take over the planet. In order to supply their need for power, they required an energy source besides the sun, so they began farming human beings. The human body generates more bioelectricity than a 120-volt battery and over 25,000 BTUs of body heat. Morpheus explains, consequently, it was a perfect source of power. The machines, therefore, started using people as batteries, and to keep the human race ignorant of its condition and under control, the Matrix was created, a computer-generated virtual world. Almost everyone, including Neo, had been living within the illusions created by the cyber intelligence, while Morpheus and a few others who had escaped were free from the deception. They were battling to wrest control back from the machines. When Neo refuses to believe that these are the real circumstances, Morpheus asks rhetorically, what is real? How do you define real? If you're talking about your senses, what you feel, taste, smell, or see, then all you're talking about are the electrical signals interpreted by your brain. He also discloses that Neo has been born with special powers that would enable him to manipulate the Matrix and defeat the machines. An oracle had prophesied that a man would return to free humankind, bring about enlightenment and man's salvation. The obvious reference is to Christ, and Neo is seen as the promised Messiah. Morpheus tells him, quote, there is a greatness inside of you, Neo, a greatness that is going to lift you to unimaginable heights and that in time will change the world. To prepare for his role mentally and physically, discs are loaded into Neo's supplemental drive, including Savate, Jiu-Jitsu, Kenpo, and Kung Fu. He spars with Morpheus using the martial arts programmed inside of him, moving with incredible speed and strength, defying the law of gravity with his leaps and dodges. However, Neo fails in a critical jump, and people wonder if he is the one. Apparently, Morpheus has been mistaken before. To make sure of his identity, Neo is taken to see the Oracle, someone with the eyes of a Sphinx who is never wrong. The Matrix cannot tell you who you are, Morpheus declares, but an Oracle can. She sees beyond the relativity of time. For her, there is no past, present, or future. There is only what is. When Neo is skeptical, saying that he doesn't believe in this stuff, Morpheus replies, faith is beyond the reach of whys and why-nots. These things are not a matter of cause and effect, Neo. I do not believe things with my mind. I believe them with my heart, in my gut. Religion is thus given precedence over science, feelings over rationality that created the Matrix. Contrary to expectations, the Oracle seems to deny that Neo is the one, although, like most seers, soothsayers, and prophets, her words are ambiguous. She does not foretell that Morpheus will attempt to give up his life so Neo can live. Then Neo will have to decide which of the two will die. Fast-paced action scenes follow as agents of the Matrix, who are machines in human form, swarm into the headquarters of the rebels. Several of the rebels are killed, and amidst blasts of gunfire, Neo, Morpheus, Trinity, and Cypher try to escape through the crawl space between the walls. Agent Smith momentarily catches Neo, but Morpheus explodes through the lathe and plaster and grabs Smith by the throat. He tells Trinity to leave him behind and save Neo, so the two of them can slide inside the wall to the basement where they escape through an opening in the sewers. Now, on this channel, Movie Nuts, we're going to have all kinds of portrayals of these different films, whether it's actual video clips that'll really help bring visuals to these ideas as well. So I know I'm trying to read this for you, but as promised, we will put together daily videos diving into all this. We're going to cover The Matrix a ton. We're going to cover all the great films from history, the future, and whatnot. So I'm going to keep going here. Almost through this chapter, and I hope this has been really informative so far, kind of tying together my ideas for this channel. Movie Nuts. Today is February 6, 2023, and this channel of how we're going to dive into films, how it dictates, how history dictates films, films dictate history, and how the philosophy goes both ways, from people with their philosophy into the film, and how we pull philosophy from films. So I hope this has sort of been a great introduction to my ideas for this channel. Okay. Meanwhile, Morpheus is captured, and Agent Smith begins extracting information from him using a serum that attacks his neurosystems. To avoid having their entire operation destroyed, Tank and Trinity reluctantly decide that Morpheus must be killed, which they can do remotely. However, Neo will not agree. He realizes that this is the moment the Oracle predicted, when either he or Morpheus would die, and he decides to risk his life in attempting a rescue. Trinity insists on going with him, so the two of them are propelled inside the Matrix. More fast action follows as Neo and Trinity penetrate the government building where Morpheus is being held, killing a number of guards with their guns, fists, and explosives. They then steal a helicopter and attack the room where Morpheus is imprisoned. Neo manages to extract Morpheus by dangling a rope, and they carry him to safety, landing on the roof of a skyscraper. In the final scene that begins in a subway station, Neo and Agent Smith fight a furious battle, each twisting, bending, and ducking faster than the bullets coming at them. They land powerful blows, kickbox, and hurl each other into walls, exhibiting uncanny suppleness and speed. Although Smith is hit by an oncoming train, he metamorphoses into an identical agent and begins to chase Neo through the city. Several agents join in the pursuit, appearing from the midst of the crowds, from behind the tent flaps, crates, fish counters. Neo ducks into buildings, sprints down corridors, through apartments, and scrambles up a fire escape as bullets whiz by all around him. But when he throws open the door to one room, Agent Smith is waiting for him. He kills Neo with one shot. One would think the rebel struggle would be over with the Matrix emerging victorious, but Neo miraculously comes to life. He hears Trinity's voice saying, "The Oracle, she told me that I'd fall in love with that man. The man I would love would be the one. You see, you can't be dead, Neo. You can't be, because I love you. You hear me? I love you." At this, Neo rises to his feet, effortlessly overcomes Agent Smith, even making bullets stop in their tracks. The Matrix is thereby defeated. Love overcoming hate. That's another theme in this, love overcoming hate. And as the camera rises above the city, Neo ascends still faster, traveling upwards at unearthly speed. We can see in the film a strong religious allegory. The symbolism alone is hard to miss. Neo as a Christ figure, the Messiah come to save the world. Trinity, a demigoddess of the New Age variety, and Morpheus, the god of dreams in Ovid's Metamorphosis. Several interpreters have seen further Christian elements in this film, some of which have already been mentioned. For example, Neo has been taken as an anagram for Eon, and one. Oh yeah, Eon is opposite. Neo, the opposite of that, or the anagram for that is Eon, and one is a rearrangement, like the one. That's interesting. He is born into the world anew, like the virgin birth of Christ. Morpheus can be seen as John the Baptist, who foretold Christ's coming. The hovercraft is called the Nebuchadnezzar, and the core of the planet where human survivors live is Zion, both of which are biblical references. Cypher is a Judas who gave up Morpheus to Agent Smith, a Roman centurion. At the end of the film, Neo rises into the sky just as Christ ascended to heaven. In Neo's death and resurrection are foretold just as Christ prophesies he would be killed and raised from the dead. For our purposes, The Matrix offers a fascinating approach to the question of reality. It may be far-fetched to think that a master computer is feeding the perception into our brain so that we are experiencing a virtual world. But we do sometimes wonder whether reality exists only in our minds. We may not be computer viruses or batteries for computers, but in today's world, perhaps we are increasingly being told what to think. It is more than paranoia to fear control by drugs, technology, and advertising in government bureaus. So we are sympathetic to the notion that our minds could be manipulated from outside. Limited as we are to the private space inside our heads, we are never certain of how much contact we have with anything objective or whether the internal or the external is real. In the modern world of implants, virtual objects, cyberspace, holograms, robotics, bioengineering, and artificial intelligence, what we take to be true might just be the illusions of senses or delusions of the mind. In a sense, our mental life forms a world in itself, and even if it's phony, that may be all we have. As Morpheus asks, if we are unable to awaken from a dream, how do we know the difference between the dream world and the real world? The Matrix raises such questions within the context of entertaining high-tech drama, using special effects such as computer animation, wire stunts, and impossible martial arts. The film creates an exciting visual fantasy. It crosses the boundary between cyberpunk and the reflective, ultimately offering us a metaphysical thriller. That's an understatement. Here are some study questions, and we're going to wrap this up here in just a moment. Again, this is for the YouTube channel Movie Nuts, and I hope you've stayed here until this point. I'll talk a little bit more at the end of these study questions, but here we go. Study questions. Define the nature of the Matrix. That was number one. Number two, do you think that there is any way of telling the difference between virtual reality and actual life? Number three, in what way is the Matrix a Christian parable? Number four, do the agents fight so hard to perpetuate the false reality? Number five, if you were Neo, would you take the red or the blue pill? Would you rather know the harsh truth or believe the comforting delusion? And that's that chapter. And again, this book is called Philosophy Through Fiction and Film. And really interesting book. I've had this book for over 20 years and only picked it up a handful of times. I was supposed to read it for school. I think I read, what I needed to read for school, but I wasn't really into film and movies at that point in my life, years ago. But now I am, of course. And this book right here is The Fourth Turning. You can get both of these at your library, or it's just, buying them. Absolutely buying them. They're timeless, to say the least. And again, these books are blowing my mind in their, this book is, I think I got this one 2004, I think it was, 2003, 2004. In this book, 2004. And this book is from the library, and this is from 1997. So when I mean timeless, which brings us back to the idea of how cyclical our society works, how cyclical we are, and how predictive we can be with each other to see how we can cope or how we can deal or how we can excel into the future. And, all of these things really tie back to the purpose of this channel here at Movie Nuts and the ideas for it. Again, today is February 6th, 2023. And for this channel, I really want to weave together how we can move ourselves into the future at a high rate of speed of success and enlightenment and education by understanding history and how it ties into films, and also how films tie into history and back and forth. And there's even, I'll leave you with this, and how this goes both directions here between film and history, or history and film, or philosophy and movies, or movies in philosophy. I think it was Grease. When Grease came out in 1978 or 79, it actually caused gangs in New York to start doing dance routines in the streets because of how popular it was. So it's interesting how, I'm sure the ideas for Grease were pulled from, was it Grease or was it I might be thinking of the wrong one here. What was the other one? Grease or I'll think of it, but I think it was Grease. I think it was Grease. And which direction do our lives get dictated by movies, or do we dictate movies? And I actually think it's symbiotic. I actually think it goes both ways. And so in a nutshell, that's what I want to cover in this channel. And we're going to do daily uploads. We're going to do top 10 lists. We're going to do all kinds of really neat stuff to combine the educational component with films and your favorite movies from history to the present to the future, upcoming stuff in the past that you may have missed that you want to bring back in your life and check out. And there's a lot to learn in films. There's a lot to learn in how we perceive films in our reality. And I think what we've covered today is a lot of ground for the first installment of this channel. Again, my name is Nick. I'm the creator of this channel, and this channel is called Movie Nuts, and today is February 6th, 2023. And I really hope you enjoyed all of this, and I can't wait to see your comments, and I can't wait to hear the explanations and ideas that you have for each one of our videos that we'll be putting out. We're planning on putting up videos daily on this channel, and so I'd like you to stay tuned, and that's it. I think we're just out of time, and again, this book is Philosophy Through Fiction and Film, and this book is The Fourth Turning by William Strauss and Neil Howe. And in fact, he's coming out with a new book. These two guys are coming out with a new book called something about the fourth turning, like we are in the fourth turning, or how to deal with the fourth turning, something like that. Okay, so leave there. Nice to meet you.